Alrighty guys, welcome back to Star Wars Review. Today, I am doing the monthly Star Wars recap for January and February 2026, which this is going to be a continuation of my weekly Star Wars recap series, just in the monthly format, which I wasn't able to get an episode out at the end of January, so I'm just going to combine January and February. Obviously, we're already halfway through March, but all the news I'm going to be talking about today is from the months of January and February. And so at the end of this month, I will do another one talking about news, what came out this month. But so the format of this show, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of talk about the top news story from the month, and then dive into some new releases, what released in said month, then go back into all the other news, what happened, and then at the end, talk about everything what's coming out in the next upcoming month. Obviously, like I said, we're already halfway through March, so with the new releases, some of those have already came out, so yeah. But anyways, let's just dive right into the news, which the biggest story from January was that Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy stepped down, and that Dave Filoni and Lynwen Brennan will now serve as co-presidents, with Filoni also serving as chief creative officer, which obviously Filoni started working at Lucasfilm back in the mid-2000s on the Clone Wars, directly with George Lucas, and then after the Disney acquisition, he worked on Rebels, and then jumped to the live action stuff with The Mandalorian, and then Ahsoka, where he's currently working on the second season of Ahsoka, and the film The Mandalorian and Grogu. But Brennan joined ILM in 1999, where she eventually became the president in 2009, but then moved over to Lucasfilm in 2015, where she eventually became the executive vice president in 2024, and is now going to serve as co-president with Filoni. So, obviously both longtime employees of Lucasfilm. Obviously Filoni a lot more public-facing, as he's mainly been a creative with stories, where I assume Brennan has probably been a little more on the business side of things. So yeah, but obviously then I think Kennedy then did some exit interviews with some of the bigger entertainment magazines and whatnot, which she mentioned several projects were in development the past several years. Obviously, a lot of the movies, like James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi film, Taika Waititi's film, Donald Glover's Lando film. I don't think she mentioned the Rey movie, so obviously definitely puts that one a little more in limbo if it'll happen. Obviously, I think definitely the Dawn of the Jedi movie said that was kind of just on hold, so I assume everything what had been announced and not filmed probably in that state, and obviously Filoni and Brennan will then kind of move forward and plan the future of Star Wars storytelling. Who knows, maybe some of those movies will actually get made. Obviously, I do really hope Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi movie gets made, as I really like him as a director, and I believe Beau Willimon wrote the script, which he wrote some episodes of Andor, which were great, and also he's written other things that are great too. But yeah, I think also Kennedy mentioned the Hunt for Ben Solo movie. Obviously, that would be an interesting one moving forward too, because obviously that one was like Lucasfilm seemed to be on board with it, but then Bob Iger shot that one down, which he also just recently stepped down again as CEO, and I forget the guy who's replacing him. So interested to see where everything goes. Obviously, Starfighter, that already film that's going to be coming out next year. I obviously excited for that one. I'm a big fan of Ryan Gosling, so excited to see him in a Star Wars movie. Obviously, I don't know when we'll learn more about what the future of Star Wars will hold. Obviously, I would assume probably nothing until after The Mandalorian and Grogu releases. But yeah, don't really have much else to say on this topic. So let's actually move on to the biggest news story from February, which was a new trailer for The Mandalorian and Grogu, which also had a Super Bowl ad, which was interesting because it wasn't a trailer. It was more of like a homage to like Super Bowl ads, like car or beer or whatever commercials. But it also didn't like team up with another company, so it just was a straight up ad for the movie, which is an interesting way to market. But I don't know, seems like it kind of flopped with the reception to it because I feel like it probably would have worked better if it ended with like a new trailer tomorrow. But this trailer came out, you know, a few weeks later. So yeah, definitely interesting. They probably wasted a lot of money. But the trailer did then come out, which shows off more of the film. Honestly, still don't really know what it's fully about exactly. But in the trailer, we see Mando without his helmet. Obviously Grogu doing a lot of stuff. Zeb is there. Martin Scorsese is voicing a character, which was the biggest surprise to me. Obviously, it just seems like a quick little cameo, but that's definitely interesting. Also, Embo is back, or at least a character who looks a lot like him, which they don't mention by name. And in the article on StarWars.com, say it's a Kuzo, bounty hunter. So I'm assuming it's just Embo, but it seems like he's probably hunting Mando and Grogu down. I don't know. Obviously, I don't really care that he's back. He's in a couple episodes of the Clone Wars. Never really found him cool, so I don't know. I feel like a character like Cad Bane, I would have been a little more excited about, but they kind of blew their load with Cad Bane and the Book of Boba Fett. So now we have Embo, who, like I said, just I don't really think he's that cool, but Scorsese voicing an Ardennian fry cook. Well, that is kind of cool, but yeah. Anyways, I should have a trailer breakdown soon. I haven't finished writing it yet, so hopefully in the next week or so, I will get that done. But the movie is still set to release May 22nd, 2026. But like I said, with the format, obviously I was doing 2 months, so I did two stories. Hopefully in the future, I can get these done on time, so I'll do one story and now jump into new releases from the past month, which obviously there will be for January and February. There was a new adult novel, Outlaws Low Red Moon, which tied into the video game Outlaws. Was another weirdly timed tie-in novel. It came out way afterwards. I have not gotten around to reading it yet. In fact, all these new releases are all publishing stuff, and I haven't read any of them. There was the final issue of Legacy of Vader, which was its 12th. Then Star Wars issue 9 and issue 10, which were the final two issues. And then Han Solo Hunt for the Falcon issue 5. And Hyperspace Stories Tides of Terror issue 4, which were also the final issues. And then a Jar Jar Binks one shot also came out. And there's also a short story, Galactic Tales, A Death in Elder Block 26-0640, which, like I said, I have not read any of those. So yeah, hopefully next month I will actually read the stuff that comes out this month and actually be able to talk about it. But anyways, let's move back into the news, which another big one. There was a trailer for Maul Shadow Lord. I should have a breakdown of this out either already or right after this video, as I'm already done writing all that, so that should be done. So I'm not going to dive too much into the trailer, but there was other details like the release schedule, which the series will be premiering April 6th, 2026, with its first 2 episodes, and it'll be 10 episodes in total, with 2 releasing every week on Monday. And so the final 2 episodes will release on May 4th, 2026 for Star Wars Day. But with it being 10, it's 10 episodes. It's going to be shorter than previous Star Wars animated series seasons. But they do describe it as each episode kind of leads into the next one, where shows like Rebels and the Bad Batch. There was overarching stories. But for the most part, each episode was kind of an adventure of the week with an occasional 2-part episodes. And obviously the Clone Wars was more arc-based, where every couple episodes kind of led into each other, but then it'll move on to another story, where this one, it seems like, all 10 will lead into the next. So a little different from previous animated Star Wars series, which I'm definitely interested to see how the animation team will do something like that. But obviously the series will once again star Sam Witwer as the voice of Maul, but the rest of the cast includes Gideon Adelon as Devon Azara, a Force-sensitive Twi'lek, and Oscar-nominated actor Wagner Moura as Brander Lawson, and Richard Ayoade as Two Boots. So yeah, like I said, I will have a trailer breakdown and obviously then reviews of all the episodes when they come out. But moving on to another trailer, this time for the video game Star Wars Galactic Racer, which was more of kind of a gameplay trailer, as it shows, kinda gameplay. As it's the more cinematic gameplay trailer where there's no HUD or anything, but it's obviously what the game will kind of look like when you're actually playing it. But obviously it shows off some new racing vehicles and whatnot. Some more story stuff, which I am interested to see how the story elements will fully work in the game. But the biggest thing was at the end of the trailer, which shows that pod racer Ben Quadranaros will return to the game, which I'm gonna be honest, I was more excited for that than Embo appearing in the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer. But yeah, obviously, excited for a new racing Star Wars game. But no word on any exact release date or release window other than just 2026. I assume we'll learn more later. Hopefully, we learn more about Zero Company, the strategy game, what's also supposed to release this year, as we haven't heard anything about that game in almost a year now. I think the last time they talked about it was during Star Wars Celebration. In fact, that's when they revealed it, so they haven't really talked about it since. And that is still supposed to come out this year, so hopefully we learn more about that one soon. But moving on to some theme park stuff, they announced that Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland and Disney World will be getting a big update on April 29th, as they'll be kind of overhauling the park to be more original trilogy themed, and so kind of taking the story elements of the park to that era. And so characters like Vader, Luke, Leia, and Han will now be featured in the park. Obviously, the park previously was more sequel era themed, with the story of it being set during that. But they do mention that characters like Rey will still appear from time to time. And I think Ahsoka also is another character. But obviously Din Djarin and Grogu will also still appear, as the ride Mandalorian Smuggler's Run will be going through a Mando and Grogu themed version. There is the ride Rise of the Resistance, which is very sequel focused with its story. They don't mention if that will be going under any overhaul, so I'm not fully sure. But yeah, I've never been to Disney World or Land, and so therefore I've never been to Galaxy's Edge, so this isn't really something I can really talk about too much. And honestly, something I'm not super duper into. Not super into theme parks, so I don't know. But back when the park opened in 2019, they did have publishing stuff, and there was a comic series. And so with this rebrand, they announced a new comic series tying into it, with it being titled Galaxy's Edge: Echoes of the Empire, which will have a story following Luke, Leia, and Chewie set in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, which the series will be written by Ethan Sachs, who wrote that first Galaxy's Edge comic series back in 2019. which that series kind of had like an ongoing story, but then most of the issues would be like a flashback of some Star Wars character visiting Batuu, where it seems like this series will be more ongoing story. So yeah, I know, 5 issues. But talking about comics, Marvel also announced a new series of one-shots based around Rogue One for the movie's 10th anniversary, with the first one following Cassian, titled Rogue One Cassian Andor, which will be written by Benjamin Percy with art by Luke Ross and release on May 6, 2026, which it seems like the story of this one will bridge the gap between Andor Season 2 and Rogue One, as they'll tell the story of Cassian infiltrating the rings of Kafrene. So, in that very short amount of time when they leave Yavin 4 at the end of Andor Season 2, and when we see Cassian on the rings of Kafrene at the start of Rogue One. But then it'll be followed with Rogue One Jyn Erso, written by Ethan Sachs. Then Rogue One Saw Gerrera, written by Mark Bernardin. Then Rogue One Sharut and Baze, written by Stephanie Phillips. And finally, Rogue One Darth Vader, written by Chris Condon. And I'll say descriptions for them, I don't know how exact, but it seems like each one will kind of follow the characters kind of leading in to Rogue One. So yeah, but I'll say each one will come out every month. So Cassian will be May, Jyn's will be June, Saw Gerrera will be July, Shrewt and Baze will be August, and then Darth Vader will be September. But that's all the news from January and February. But to jump into new releases, which for March 2026, which some of them are already out, not a whole lot. There's Shadow of Maul issue 1, which will come out March 4th, 2026, which is a comic series tying into Maul, Shadow Lord. Then there's Hyperspace Stories, The Bad Batch Rogue Agents issue 2, which also came out March 4th. But then a new graphic novel, Hyperspace Stories Grievous, which will come out March 17th. And finally, The High Republic Adventures Pathfinders issue 1, which comes out March 25th, which will be a return to the Phase 2 era of The High Republic. So how the Marvel is kind of going a little less on the comics. Currently no actual ongoing releasing right now, and no ongoing announced. Also, those 2 other comics are, miniseries basically. So, definitely interested to see where Marvel comics are going. Dark Horse is obviously still releasing stuff, so yeah, interested to see where everything goes with the Marvel Star Wars comics. But that's everything this month, or the past 2 months. I will hopefully be back at the end of March with another monthly Star Wars recap. There's some more Mandalorian and Grogu news to talk about, so yeah. But anyways, you can check out my trailer breakdowns I will release for Maul, Shadow Lord, and The Mandalorian and Grogu. But I've been Star Wars Review, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Hey, never touch the buttons. I can use some information.
Whoa, for this price, I'll tell you whatever you want.